picking up coverage of that massive earthquake and the tsunami alerts that are really getting folks on edge across the country. We can see Hawaii impacted, Alaska, and much of the west coast of the continental United States under some form of tsunami alert. Our chief meteorologist, Brad Panovich, is joining us here in the Live Impact News studio. Brad, we saw you have been watching this very closely. This is among the largest earthquakes to ever strike.
Yeah, and it's really concerning in a couple points. One, 8.7, that's going to put it in top 10 biggest quakes in world history. It's also I'm looking at some of the seismograph data just to get a little geeky on you and look at some of the data. I was kind of looking at what kind of quake this was. You remember faults can slide different ways. They can slide side to side, they can strike. This was unfortunately the worst kind for a tsunami. It's called a mega thrust. There was a huge uplift that displaced a lot of water. So looking at the sensor data, this was a mega thrust earthquake, which typically means huge tsunamis. And that's the kind of Indonesian earthquake, the Japanese earthquake, which ended up producing massive tsunamis as well. So the type of quake, and it was only 12 miles deep. So that's a bad sign for a tsunami. So you're seeing all these upgrades to the West Coast being under a tsunami watch, Hawaii, most of the Central Pacific under tsunami warnings, because there's a very high likelihood there'll be a tsunami. We don't know the size of the wave. That's always the difficult forecast part. You don't know, but looking at some of the first waves coming into the peninsula there in Russia, it's a pretty sizable wave that's moving in there. The next area would be the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, and then the west coast of Canada, eventually the west coast of the United States, and then Hawaii, Guam, even Japan, Hawaii, Midway, Tahiti, all these areas in the Central Pacific would be impacted. Now, the timeline, these things travel at like 600 to 700 miles an hour in the open ocean, and you wouldn't even know it if you're on a boat because they're all underwater. It's when they get near the coast, Vanessa, they start getting bigger and bigger because it's not that the wave is getting bigger, it's that the seafloor is coming up, obviously, as it gets shallower and shallower, so it causes the wave to get really large. And so depending on the shape of the coast and the continental shelf, you can get bigger waves in some areas and smaller waves in others, and then the shape of the bays and the coastline. There's all these fine nuances about wave science, about how that works, but there's a good reason Hawaii is now blasting out tsunami warnings along the coast because they're likely going to get a direct hit, probably around their time, 7:15, 7:20ish. So about 6 hours from the quake. So think of an airplane. If it was traveling from the west coast to Hawaii, it takes about 6 hours. It's about how long it's going to take for the tsunami to get to Hawaii.
And now you were saying the fact that you wouldn't be able to really detect it visibly if you were on a boat.
Yeah.
I presume there are ways to measure, like buoys, where they probably keep track of, hey, this wave is coming and it's maybe this size. I don't know what the buoys track.
Yeah, so there's these floating buoys. They're called dart buoys. They're all over the Pacific. They're actually specifically designed for detecting tsunamis. And what they're doing is they're looking for column changes in the water. They're subtle. If you looked at the raw data, you say, wow, the water column only moved a couple feet. Well, that's a sign of a pretty good tsunami passing under. So one of the things they do when there's a tsunami warning in the Pacific, normally we get data from the buoys like sometimes every 10 minutes, 5 minutes. They go to 15-second updates. So the data starts transmitting almost in real time. And so we can monitor some of these buoys. So I'm just actually looking at some of them right now just to see what the data looks like. And there's certain two things you look for. It's tsunamis are kind of weird. You look for a drop in water before the rise because as a wave builds, remember there's a crest and a trough in the waves. And before a big wave approaches you, you're going to be in water receding because it's building back towards that. So I'm looking at some of these off the coast of, let's say, the Aleutian Islands. I'm looking at Alaska here. The water column is actually decreasing, which means there's likely a tsunami heading towards the Aleutian Islands. So I would be shocked if there wasn't a tsunami. To me, the only question is how big. And unfortunately, a lot of areas are susceptible in the Central Pacific. I just got back from Hawaii, ironically enough, just 2 weeks ago, and the first thing you notice going around all the islands, there's tsunami sirens everywhere, all along the coast. My kids noticed them. I was pointing them out. They're solar powered. There's these tall towers with multiple sirens on them, and I was telling my kids, I'm like, those are tsunami warning sirens, and I said we got to be careful of earthquake anywhere in the Pacific when you're in Hawaii. It's just not on Hawaii. Earthquakes in Alaska, the West Coast, Mexico, South America, Russia, over there towards Japan and Indonesia. Some of the biggest quakes in Alaska have caused tsunamis in Hawaii. In fact, one of the areas I visited there, we were on Oahu, and for some reason I was following the Oahu emergency management. I think because I was there was a flood warning, so I was following them on Twitter, and they just put out an alert. But on Oahu, the north side of the island, we were touring some of the old bases from Pearl Harbor. And one of the bases on the north side of the island we went to visit, there's only one thing left of that base. It's a little machine gunner bunker. And you think it was destroyed in Pearl Harbor. No, it was destroyed by a tsunami.
Wow.
It was the first base that actually shot at the planes that were coming in during Pearl Harbor. But there was a tsunami about 4 years later from an earthquake up in the Alaskan Aleutian Isles, and it destroyed the entire base, and that was on the north shore of Oahu. So they have a long history of massive tsunamis in Hawaii, so they take them very seriously. So there's a very good warning system there.
Well, now speaking of warnings and alerts, I mean, I kind of had to give myself a little bit of a crash course when we first broke the news, because it was around 7 o'clock late in that hour here on Live Impact, where we learned that there was a tsunami alert for, I believe it was Hawaii, and it was a watch at that point.
Yeah.
And to kind of steal how you've explained watches and warnings to us, it seems like there are different levels based on what elements are there versus what they think could be there.
Yeah.
So we actually have that map, and you alluded to this before with the different colors. And so there are areas that are under warnings, areas that are under watches. There's an advisory that's that orange color, and then they have this purple threat.
Yeah, so it can be a bit confusing because the earthquake first happens, right? And I got the first alert because, believe it or not, I have alerts for large earthquakes across the world always set on my phone. And when I saw 8.0, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a big quake. Thought that was big. And then you may have noticed it got upgraded to an 8.7. Well, the reason that happens is the preliminary data, maybe one sensor measures it, but as the seismic waves travel across the entire world, even seismographs here in North Carolina will detect that quake. As more data goes in, they can kind of triangulate and get a better idea of how big the quake was. So when you see this upgrade, it's not because they didn't know at first, it's just more data is coming in. The same thing happens with the tsunamis. So when you first see a 5 or an 8.0 earthquake, they run a model that said, hey, do large quakes in this location at this depth typically cause a tsunami? And if there's like a 50% chance yes, they'll just issue a watch or an advisory for the entire Pacific just to give people an early heads up. And then as more data comes in, they'll either upgrade or downgrade that watch or advisory to a warning. And so that's why you see the initial thing, because it's all about getting the word out as soon as possible so people have time to go to higher ground. And as I'm saying that, one of my former colleagues in WWL is actually in Hawaii right now.
Oh, wow.
And she replied to my tweet about a mega thrust earthquake, and she's shown me video of them driving to higher ground right now.
Oh, my goodness.
So they were like us. They were just there on vacation, and because she said, oh, you're not making me feel any better. When I saw that it was a mega thrust quake, she looks like she's stuck in traffic, evacuating to higher ground. There's a line of traffic. I don't know what island she's on, but she's in Hawaii right now. She said Laura Buchtel, she used to be a meteorologist at WWL, our sister station in New Orleans. So looks like she's got the whole family in the car, and they're on their way.
Oh, I can see. We have kind of in our preview monitor.
So I'm trying to make it bigger.
Do you want us to show it?
Yeah, so you can show it. So she sent this to
Impact Coast.
So just so people who are watching our stream, Laura's a good friend of mine. She's out of TV. She's actually a meteorologist, but she got out of TV. This is her and her family currently in Hawaii. I'm not sure what island on, but they're in evacuation line right now, trying to head to higher ground. I don't know the audio. I know we have audio. I can't hear it.
We do have audio, and it sounds like there's an already
Quote,
sitting down because it was loud.
you are in danger.
Turning the radio up there, so that's
According
probably
to the
the
alert.
traffic there.
Get
all
away
going north,
from
so they got the
coastal
alerts
waters.
right away. And like I said, they don't mess around in Hawaii. I think it was a really good thing the way they warn people. They have the phone system, they have the radio, and obviously those sirens all over the island. And people know to go to higher ground, and they have these great signage of evacuation routes on where to go. So especially if you're like a tourist like Laura is, it's pretty easy to find like where you need to go. And the good thing about Hawaii as well, there's a lot of mountains and high ground to go to. You just got to get away from the coast. So that's a video from her, and you can see that line. It looks like everybody's going out. Just looking at
According to the alert, get away from coastal waters.
In a second, but yeah, that's a video of them evacuating Hawaii currently. Remember, 6-hour difference from us. So right now there, it's basically 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So it's the middle of the afternoon over there right now, and that's the other good thing about these alerts. They're getting them in the middle of the day and not in the middle of the night. Because when I was there, we got a WIA alert on my phone, and I'll be honest with you, the first thing I thought was tsunami. But luckily, it was a flash flood warning for the other side of the island, which I say luckily, it was still a flash flood warning, but it was for the mountainous area on the other side of the island. But the first thing I thought, it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and our phone goes off in the hotel, and I'm thinking tsunami right away. And unfortunately, this one's real. This is the real deal here for the folks in Hawaii.
Yeah, and there was something interesting too that you brought to our attention, and I don't think we actually got to show the graphic since you've come here into the Live Impact News studio. The fact that there was some sort of activity picked up in our area because of this.
Yeah.
Not that folks would maybe feel it. I didn't feel anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, here we've got the graphic now. We can share it.
So what you're looking at here, this is the seismograph from Taylorsville. Now, this just goes to show you how connected the whole world is. Remember, go back to 8th, 10th grade, 9th grade, whatever you took geology class, if you took any geology, the Earth has, a molten core mantle, right? And it has this thin crust. It's basically, if you looked at it on a large scale, it's basically the thickness of an eggshell. And so when there's an earthquake in that crust on the other side of the world, those seismic waves travel really quickly through that liquid molten rock, and they make it all the way here to the Carolinas pretty quickly. They're called P waves. They're the primary waves, and then the secondary waves will come. So we don't feel them because it's kind of like a low frequency thing that you couldn't hear or feel, but the seismographs are sensitive enough to pick them up. So when you see those giant waves like that and how they go on for a long time there, that's actually a look at those P waves, and so they make it all the way to the Carolinas. So it's one of those things, and that seismograph right there, Vanessa, could have been one of the ones they used to help calculate the 8.7, because as the waves hit seismographs, not only here but all over the world, that data then goes into a computer and they can calculate the actual magnitude. So as those waves traveled around the world, that's why you saw the upgrade to an 8.7 as more data was collected on the waves.
Yeah, you actually made me think of something that we were hoping to get more context on, and that is the magnitude, because I feel like the last time we had to talk about an earthquake here on Live Impact, we had a really great explainer from our weather impact team about how the degrees of magnitude multiply, and when people think 7 versus 8, or maybe 8 versus 8.7, it kind of doesn't sound like a lot in our brain, but that's a massive difference.
Yeah, so it's what they consider, the magnitude goes up pretty much, like, I would say it's not exponential, but for every degree or point that you go up, you're seeing a massive increase in power. So you would think a small increase from, let's say, a 2.0 to a 3.0 isn't really that big, but it's actually huge. It's like a million times stronger.
Yeah.
And so I wish I could show you the chart, but especially to get the higher ones. But
we can probably show you.
But,
do you want us to pull it?
Yeah. So I think it's on my laptop. So this will give you a good example of. So the left side is the magnitude, the right side is the energy, and there's really good examples here. So like a magnitude 4 earthquake, is about 15,000 times, stronger than a magnitude 3. And then you go up and you see some of these, like Krakatoa eruption, which is a massive eruption in 1883. That's a 6. And you see at the very top of this list, so that, I can't even pronounce it, Chicxulub impact 66 million years ago. You know what that is? That was the
Big Bang?
No, that was...
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I wish we had...
No, that doesn't make any sense.
Estimated energy released by the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs.
Oh, okay.
That landed on the Yucatan Peninsula. So that gives you... But Chile is the biggest one, Alaska, 1964. But you see Japan and Sumatra. So that's the Japanese earthquake. Think Fukushima. Sumatra, that's the Boxing Day tsunami in the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific. That was in 2004. Those are around 9.0. So you see how exponentially this stuff goes up pretty quickly. So it's not, it's not what we call exponential, but it is pretty close to that as far. So when you go up these like 0.2, 0.3, you think, oh, it's just a little increase. That is 10, 100 times, 1,000 times stronger as you go up in energy. So it is really massive. So the right side shows you the energy right there. Average EF5 tornado, about 300,000 tons of TNT. Mount St. Helens, 9.5 million tons of TNT. So that increase, that's a 4 to a 5. So
Yeah.
you went from 300,000 to 9.5 million. That increase is huge. So these subtle like 0.2, 0.3s are pretty significant. And that's why, an East Coast earthquake that's 5.1 or 4.8 is pretty significant for us because, we usually get 1 and 2s, but a 3 or 4 or 5 is a huge increase.
I'm probably getting into the weeds here,
Yeah.
and so just stop me and we can just walk back out of the weeds. But the Chicxulub impact,
Yeah, impact
I could see on the graph, it's comparable with a 10.
with a 10.
Did
yeah.
they pick that because that is just like the largest explosion that could ever think of
And
that has
obviously
happened on the
We weren't
planet?
here to record that, but that's based on just geologic information and kind of an estimate of how big that was. To
That's
give you an idea.
fascinating.
So that's an asteroid impact, if you will. And you see some volcanic eruptions on there, some of these big. There's a nuclear bomb test on there as well, the largest nuclear bomb test, which I think is a Russian test. I think it was Tsar-Bomba, which I'm not sure what that was, but that was actually the equivalent of a 5.5 earthquake. Meteor crater impact is on there. If you've ever been to Arizona, that's the meteor impact there. That's down there around a 4.8. So it gives you some, because remember, if the Earth is impacted by a large object, it's going to cause
Yeah.
essentially an earthquake because it will shake the whole Earth like that. And obviously volcanic eruptions will do the same thing.
Tsar-Bomba, by the way, just had to run through the Google machine. The most powerful nuclear weapon ever created and tested, detonated in 1961.
Yeah.
50 megatons of TNT.
50 megatons, yeah.
Wow.
And that's only like a 5.5 earthquake.
That's
So
incredible.
Tonight we had 8.7.
Yeah.
That gives you all you need to know. That's the equivalent, of several hundred of those. You're getting to 9 trillion kilotons of power. I mean, it's just, these numbers can get so high, it just blows your mind. But that's the kind of energy release. And so think about that happening in the Pacific Ocean, that movement of water. The best way I can describe a tsunami to somebody is if you're ever in the bathtub or the pool, take your arms underwater and pull them out of the water real quick. You displace water. And it's a swimming pool or bathtub, so those waves are tiny, but in the Pacific, those are going to be giant waves that are going to move across the entire ocean. Because what happened is the crust below that plate, that thrust, the mega thrust plate there off the coast of Russia, probably, I'll have to look at the data, it could have came up 3 or 4 or 5 feet. I know the Sumatra earthquake, I think it came up like 10 feet. So it displaces so much water under the ocean, and that just creates giant waves across the entire Pacific basin, and those will bounce around for days. We might see waves that go back and forth across the Pacific well into the end of the week. They might be smaller waves, but the bigger waves will be coming here later today.
Yeah. I think about, too, some of the ways not only that we try to gather information, but also ways that we as, I guess, a society in general prepare for these types of natural disasters. And I think about my mom grew up in the Pacific Ring of Fire. I mean, she's from the Philippines. And so I've heard stories about the different, weather impacts and in this case, earthquakes and such that they have to think about and prepare. And I'm just wondering, Brad, in your visits over to Hawaii,
Yeah.
whether you were able to kind of see, other than, I know you mentioned like the sirens and
Yeah.
things, but are there ways that you've learned that they maybe have special ways that they do their structures or things like that? Did you happen to see that, evidence of that?
Yeah, on the coast, because they don't get a lot of hurricanes in the Hawaiian Islands. They have Iniki, which is obviously a famous one as a Category 4, but, they're actually pretty small set of islands. So just from a target standpoint, it's really kind of rare for a hurricane to get there. But the ocean water in the Central Pacific is pretty cool. So most of the big hurricanes go to the south or they dissipate by the time they get there. But what I noticed on the coast was a lot of the buildings still were built up like on stilts, and I kept thinking, well, they're not
Yeah.
susceptible to storm surge like we are here in the southeast. So I kind of wondered, and I thought to myself, well, this has got to be for tsunamis, right?
Yeah.
Because they built there's probably a code, I would imagine, on the coast that you have to build above a certain height for minimal tsunamis, because they're always going to have the threat for even small tsunamis. And when I say small, I'm talking, possibly 1 to 2 meters, which is just, anywhere from 2 to 3 feet in some cases. But in many cases, you get these massive ones, and you can't really build for those, obviously. But I do wonder, like some of these coastal residents, if they had to reinforce their house for possibly larger tsunamis. But what I would say is that the warning system is kind of their best technique, is to get people out of harm's way. The properties, they can go, but they don't want to lose lives.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing. I will tell you, they moved a lot of their infrastructure away from the coast. You don't see power plants and water treatment plants near the coast, I think, for this reason, because they don't want those to get damaged. But you still have a lot of ports. You still have a lot of vacation resorts and stuff near the coast. So there's still going to be a lot of people that will be at risk from these waves once they get to the Hawaiian Islands. I'm just trying to check the timeline here.
Yeah.
So right now is looking like Hawaii is around the first arrival of waves in tsunami waves in Hawaii is around 7:17 p.m. Hawaiian Standard Time. So that's going to be coming up closer to like our midnight to 1 a.m. time frame. So it'll be pitch black here when we see this in the wee hours of the morning here, but this will be happening in the evening, right before sunset. I believe when I was over there, sunset was around 7:30 at the time.
Yeah.
So this should be right before sunset for them. So there are live streams we're probably going to be able to see these waves coming in. And I've been looking through my X account, and you're seeing some of the Russian video coming in from the immediate coast there, and there certainly was a tsunami there. Pretty significant tsunami too.
Well,
now that's really close to the coast,
Yeah.
Into the epicenter. So you don't know how big those waves are going to be as they get further out in the ocean. But the fact that one has actually been detected there in Russia tells you that one has been generated.
Well, and I think just a few moments ago you brought up a good point about why it's so important to prepare even for, I guess, what you might call a minor tsunami. I remember, I think it was in our 8 o'clock hour when we learned about the fact that the alerts were expanding. And we saw that Japan had, basically their weather agency said it was expecting this tsunami that was about 3 feet. And that, I think, to us sounds minimal for an amount of water. But then I think about when we tell people about turn around, don't drown, and the different levels, how little amounts of water, just inches of water, can carry somebody away, carry away cars.
Yeah.
When you get to about a foot, I think, right here, when
Yeah.
we talk about flooding,
Take a
just in
whole
the
car.
Carolinas,
Yeah.
that's major.
Yep. And the thing about these tsunamis, which is really kind of hard for people to grasp, is sometimes the first waves aren't the biggest. So what often happens is you'll see the first wave come in, and people sometimes are like, oh, it wasn't so bad. And the second, third, fourth wave, because there's a series of waves. The best way I could describe this, if you ever thrown a rock in a pond, there's not one ripple, right? There's tons of them. And so that's what happens in these earthquakes. There's this whole area of the crust ruptured over a really long area. So the wave was generated not in a single point, but over a long distance. So there will be a series of waves that come. And sometimes, just like with ocean waves, 2 waves can kind of team up. If you're a surfer, you see 2 swells come together, you're like, that's the one I'm surfing because it's going to be a bigger wave. This happens with the tsunami waves as well. They could kind of coalesce and turn into bigger waves as they move in. I'm just noticing it looks like I'm seeing the warning still for all of Hawaii, but they're starting to expand some threats to Central America even on the tsunami warning page.
Wow.
So they're expecting this to be a Pacific-wide tsunami, because you're starting to see alerts go up for the west coast of Chile, even New Zealand and the South Pacific.
That's major.
And so what they're doing, they have these 3, if you've ever been, you probably have never gone, but I'm looking at it right now. So you got these multiple levels. You got the threat, watch, advisory, warning. So the threat means, hey, the model says you might have a tsunami. The watch means we think there's one coming, the ingredients are there, and then advisory is like we expect one, we just don't know how big, and then a warning is like kind of the guarantee. So it's a 4-step process. But the fact that more islands in areas are added to the purple pins on the map, that means they expect a threat from a tsunami, possibly even a small one. Because remember, even a 1 foot or 2 foot tsunami, it's not a big deal, but it causes some crazy currents, and it is something, especially for folks on the coast, if they're in boats, they're going to want to pay attention to. So it's been a while since I've seen the whole Pacific lit up like that on the tsunami warning page.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point in that I feel like when we looked at this map last, I don't know if we really had anything in the southern hemisphere. And yeah, you're seeing now, because I think the farthest south we had at that point was maybe the California-Mexico border, and there might have been some purple pins. You know, I think Midway Island was in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see it now. Peru, Colombia, and then
Chile.
Panama,
Yeah,
Nicaragua.
So you're getting these alerts all the way down to there. And these are considered threat. Okay, so I'm reading now 1 to 3 meter possibility. So the Cook Islands. So now we're getting some actual forecast, which is kind of interesting. So I want to look at the Hawaii one, because number 3 here. They still haven't put a total on it. So sometimes we can get a travel map in a forecasted, totals. But I think they're waiting to see more data come from the North Pacific. So what they're going to do is they're going to wait for data to come in from the areas around the Aleutian Islands where they're seeing, and sometimes you can get actual observations up there. So I'm kind of curious. I'm going to see if we got no observations up there yet.
Okay.
So every once in a while we'll get an observation from the Aleutian Islands. I'm going to see where Alaska's coming in.
While you look at that, Brad, I think we should do a reset because we might have some new folks joining us here on Live Impact News. We're reaching the bottom of the hour at this point, so our coverage of this massive earthquake and tsunami advisory for multiple parts of the globe. We've been covering this now for the past, I'd say, 2 hours at this point. Brad, you've been watching these alerts develop and also kind of how the reporting of the magnitude has changed. We're up to 8.7. You were saying this is among the top 10 ever strongest earthquakes.
So just to give you perspective, I know Jeb can take my laptop. So the USGS has a great map. It's an ironic way to use it tonight. But so these are the 10 largest earthquakes ever recorded in the world. Number 1 on this list, you could see, I'm going to make sure I zoom in on it. It's down in Chile, a 9.5 in 1960. Number 2 is the biggest quake in the U.S. It's a 9.2 in 1964 in Alaska. But number 8 is 8.7 on this list, and number 9 is 8.6. So tonight's quake would be somewhere between number 8 and 9. So that would put us in the bottom of the top 10, but one of the top 10 largest quakes ever recorded on the Earth. So that's a massive quake, and this is by far the biggest quake detected in the U.S. In the Pacific, since it looks like the 2010 Chile quake, and it would be the largest quake worldwide since the Japanese quake in 2011, which obviously caused a huge tsunami in eastern part of Japan, and obviously caused that horrible nuclear accident at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. So that is pretty stunning to see a quake of that magnitude happen. You notice a lot of the big quakes do happen in the Pacific Rim. That's what is considered the Ring of Fire, because most of the plates in the Pacific are all subduction zones where plates are going under each other. You got volcanoes, and what happens, the subduction zone is where you got 2 plates going like this. One's diving under the other one. And the reason you get big quakes, because sometimes they get stuck for a while, and all of a sudden when they let loose, they have a huge quake or huge rupture, and because of that, that's where you get the uplift, or even a push down of the seafloor will cause waves then above in the water above them. So it's not only where you get big quakes and big volcanoes, but it's where we get a lot of tsunamis as well.
And for folks who are, indeed, if you are just joining us, it sounds like, Brad is giving us an estimated time of arrival for some of these waves potentially. here on the East Coast, we'd probably think this would be the overnight hours, but over there it's the middle of the afternoon, and it could hit in the evening, right, for them?
Yeah, so I got some actual times and possible tsunami heights, the first four, and this will be updated, by the way. Please, you got to keep checking back with this because as new data comes in. So we've got some Alaska times, but I'm going to show you some of the first West Coast. So Washington State, they're forecasting, which is 23:35 Pacific, daylight time, which is basically going to be coming up close to midnight. Or slightly after. Long Beach up there in Washington, and they're forecasting anywhere from a foot to 1.4. But what's interesting is down in California, they're forecasting these to come in between midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning local time. The heights are a little bit higher, like 3.1 to 5.7 feet in Crescent City, and like San Francisco, less than a foot, but Santa Barbara, maybe a foot to 1.7. So it's going to be different in different locations, and that's all has to do with the shape of the coast and the continental shelf. These things all play into. That's why some areas closer to the quake could actually have smaller waves than areas farther away. This happens a lot in some of these. It just depends on the shape of the seafloor, the continental shelf, which is the run up to the beach, and obviously the shape of the coast. So places that have like concave shaped bays where the waves can come in and kind of amplify, they could have higher. So you're starting to see. The good news is I'm not seeing crazy high numbers for the West Coast, but that's significant. I mean, some of these areas 3-4 feet above normal mean level with waves, that will cause flooding on the coast and could cause damage to ports and areas on the beaches, because some of these areas probably aren't used to getting water that high because they're not used to, for us this would be like storm surge, right? Like
Yeah.
we'd have storm surge we're kind of used to, but some areas on the West Coast aren't used to huge storms like this producing, they'll produce waves but not surges of water like this.
Yeah. I mean, I think I referenced this before, the fact that when we're seeing, some of these estimates come in, they are kind of seemingly ranging, at least in this case, between, it seems like a foot up to maybe 3 we're seeing in Japan.
Yeah.
And I think for folks who have this image of this massive wave,
Yeah.
that they go, well, 1 foot, I mean,
Yeah.
but think about having a foot of water come in to where
Yeah.
it's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
That can cause a lot of concern.
And sometimes tsunamis, they don't look like waves. They just look like a rapid rise in the ocean. Like it doesn't look like a wave you would surf on, or like the waves you go at the beach. It just looks like all of a sudden it's like a super high tide that happens in like a matter of seconds. The water just comes up, it rises quickly, and that's why it's kind of weird. You see videos from like the Japanese tsunami and the Indian Ocean Boxing Day tsunami. You see people on the beach kind of staring out there and going, well, what is that? And they don't really realize what's happening until the water's like on top of them.
Wow.
And because it doesn't look like a wave, it just looks like, you look out in the ocean, like it just looks weird. And then all of a sudden the water is like on you, and instead of like the wave coming in and breaking and going back out into sea, it just keeps coming inland. It just keeps coming. Because there's more push behind it, so the water just keeps coming up. If you ever seen videos of tidal bores, which are like this, which is a rapid rise in water, sometimes that move up the mouth of rivers, you'll see that. I do notice that the West Coast has been upgraded to an advisory from a watch. So I think that's because now we have actual forecasted tsunami waves of, even if it's a foot, like you said,
wow, yeah.
that still is like, now we know there's probably going to at least be a tsunami of some kind. So yeah, you're seeing the orange now updated for the West Coast, and I'll read this real quick. So yeah, tsunami advisory remains in effect. This is all for Oregon, Washington, California, British Columbia, Alaska, the Aleutian Islands. So yeah, they updated all this to an advisory with those totals. The highest total I saw, Vanessa, was 5.7 feet at the high end
Wow.
in Crescent City, California, which, based on the name of that, Crescent City, if I'm pretty familiar with Crescent City, I would guess that the bay is a crescent shaped, which probably means it would have pretty high waves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the map of California, and the thing I always look at is the shape. So you see all the nooks and crannies here. You look like San Francisco Bay is pretty well protected, so the waves can't get in there. But you come down towards Santa Cruz, you've got a shape there where Seaside could get clobbered because the waves would get caught in there. And then down towards Santa Barbara, it's kind of protected a little bit. But then you got areas like Santa Maria and up towards San Luis Obispo. That area is kind of more out there. So those are the kind of coastline areas that probably would get higher waves than maybe further north. And then you go up the coast of, Oregon, Washington, into British Columbia, you've got a lot of more nooks and crannies there, so there's things to break the wave energy up and not cause it to be as high. But unfortunately for Hawaii, they don't have anything to break them. They're out here, and obviously you see my tropical systems, how they're all going around Hawaii, but there's Hawaii. Midway is over here, by the way. That's Midway, which is ironically in Midway across the Pacific.
There
That's
you
where it
go.
gets in. But it's just a little atoll. There's like an airfield there, and there's a military base there and some barracks, and that's all it is. It's amazing when you think about the war in the Pacific, how that island was fought over. It is a tiny speck of land on an atoll out there.
Yeah.
But that is technically part of the Hawaiian island chain, because you can see geographically and geologically, that's all a line of islands. There's actually tiny islands between Midway all the way down to Kauai, which is the northern island of Hawaii. That's actually where I was in Oahu and Kauai and those areas. That's why I worry about Kauai, because this is the most northern big island of the chain, and so it would probably get the most direct hit, the areas on the west coast there. So thinking like the Nepali coast, which is pretty much uninhabited, but there's a bunch of beaches there. Waimea is right there. So that west coast of Kauai is probably going to be very susceptible.
Yeah. For folks who haven't heard the origin of this tsunami, alert that we're seeing kind of to different degrees around the globe at this point, was an earthquake just off the coast of Russia. And I don't know if we've talked about this, Brad. I heard you allude, though, earlier to the fact that, you'd be on the look for aftershocks.
Yeah.
But, I mean, just looking at the National Weather Service Tsunami Alert Center, it does look like in recent days they were looking at some seismic activity around, looks like Alaska, they had on the 27th, looks like yesterday, the Macquarie Islands region. So I'm just wondering, was there a lead up
There could have been
this?
There could have been 4 shocks. There probably were that we didn't even know, but I'm seeing it's upgraded again to 8.8, by the way.
Wow.
That now you're definitely in the top 6 or 7 quakes of all time. Thank goodness in some ways this was offshore, because this was over land or closer to land. There would have been massive destruction from the quake itself.
Yeah.
8.8, and even the pager, which this is the USGS page that I look at, and the pager system, which kind of estimates fatalities, puts the fatality rate from 1 to 1,000 here, with 44% probability of 10 to 100 fatalities, and then damage, economic losses. But you can see the peninsula, it's off the coast there of the peninsula here. I guess it's Kamchatsky, I don't know. I am not very good at Russian, so I'm not going to try that one. But it's essentially this part of the world that we're in. It's kind of where, it's technically Russia, but it's very close to Alaska. The Aleutian Islands come all the way down there, and you're up towards North Korea and eastern China. So this is the extreme northwest Pacific, if you will.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll bring up a bigger map so people.
I was going to say, we have
so the
on
Bering Sea is right here.
Router 3.
So you can see the Aleutian Islands are right here. Those are those islands coming in from the right. Mm-hmm. So the Aleutian Islands are actually closer to this than mainland China. If you're in China and Russia, this peninsula sticks out, and in some cases, I think some of these islands are like the closest islands to the Russian-U.S. border right here. So this is almost in Alaska, if you will. And you see the islands stretch down, and then you go down here, and you've got Korea here, and obviously Japan. Here's Sapporo right there. So Japan's very susceptible to this as well. And then we go out in the middle of the Pacific, and then you see where Hawaii is. So just for perspective, worldwide-wise, you see the map there. This is where this occurred. It's technically in Russia, but it's actually a lot closer to the U.S. than people think.
Yeah, and on that map, and I wish we could compare it, but we do have basically where that epicenter is, if you will. That's kind of where the strongest, most serious alerts are. At least that's what it looks like. And then as we kind of go down the coast, you kind of see the alerts lighten, if you will, as you, Brad, were talking about the different degrees, where you have warning, advisory, watch, and then there's the threat, which is the purple pins.
Yeah, so there's a lot to look at there, but you can see, like, obviously the Aleutian Islands are the first ones because they're right there. And then Hawaii's off in the warning as well because they're islands and they're just kind of in that direct line out in the middle of the Pacific. And then, you see all the area on the West Coast under the advisory. So you do expect that it looks like one island, it might be Samoa, I think, that's got an advisory as well. No, that's Guam, I'm sorry. So Guam, because U.S. interests tend to get, that's what the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center is, their main responsibility is for U.S. interests, but they do forecast for the entire Pacific Basin. So American Samoa and Guam and Hawaii, obviously, are big interest out there, and then Midway and obviously Alaska and then the west coast of the U.S. So it does look like there might be a watch for Guam as well, and maybe American Samoa, which is susceptible to these in the Pacific as well. So I'm waiting to see the update from Hawaii. I haven't seen them update because I just see the warning. We've got forecast possible heights for the west coast, but not for Hawaii yet, which is kind of interesting.
Now, I am curious because you mentioned the fact that, you have a friend who shared video with you showing she's in Hawaii right now.
Yeah.
She's trying to, evacuate to higher ground. How long do folks usually have to camp out? Because, you mentioned the water just rises.
Yeah.
Does it just sit there? It's like hours?
Yeah, so
days?
unfortunately, they could be there a while because it's going to take, like we said, just under 6 hours for the first waves to get there, but there will be waves for hours and hours after that. So what they'll probably do is they're going to wait. They are overcautious and overprepared. So what they'll do is they probably will tell people to evacuate the coast and stay there until they know that there's no more waves, or if the waves are low enough that they won't cause harm. So they could be there a while, as you mentioned. I think that's a good point. Once they get there, they'll probably open shelters because I don't think it's going to be a quick, like, hey, we're going to hang out for a couple hours and leave. It might be the better part of a day before they let people go back near the coast, because the fact that it takes 6 hours for the first wave to get there, you can imagine the subsequent waves will be coming over the next 6 to 12 hours. And now you're getting into, half a day, almost a day. So it could be tomorrow at night at this time before they say, hey, the threat is completely past, everybody head back. But the other thing is, if the first couple waves are really, really tiny, that might also give them some leeway to say, hey, it looks like these aren't going to be minor. I'm looking at some of the DART data, which the DART is some of the buoys, and they did detect a 3-foot wave in one of the locations not too far from the epicenter. So they measured at least a 3-foot rise in water there. Looks like another one about 0.9 feet. So, the way it looks is this is the Hawaii update. I'm just clicking on here real quick just to see. So it looks like in general they're forecasting somewhere on the order of 3-foot waves coming towards Hawaii, at least right now. So that looks to be the general forecast here.
And I mean, we think about that as being, I think you were saying we're seeing on the higher end for folks who are expecting still in the 5-foot range, right?
Yep.
I did just see there are multiple reports showing that Kamchatka area in Russia where this quake originated. They actually reported a tsunami at this point. I know you said you were looking at video 10 to 13 feet.
Yeah, so that's pretty big. And obviously that's right close to where it is. So I would expect that to be the biggest waves. They should be smaller, but you just never know. Like I said, the energy can do weird things in the open ocean. It could travel out there. There could be waves that hit weird parts of the Pacific that we don't think are going to get big waves, and all of a sudden they get a 6 or 7 foot tsunami. Because it's just the nature of some of these waves. Remember, they got to travel over a vast area of ocean. So, as I mentioned, some of these waves could catch up to each other. There could be natural waves and natural wind and other things that make the water even higher. So there's a lot of nuance. Wave forecasting is really, really difficult because the way the ocean behaves, especially a large ocean like the Pacific, it's hard to forecast exactly what these waves will do. But the fact that we had almost a 13-foot wave there, I think tells you that there's some sizable energy at least moving through the ocean right now.
Yeah. I mean, once again, I'm probably getting into the weeds, but you mentioned the fact that you could have outside influences that are not geological, I guess, if you will. I'm just curious, are there documented instances of earthquake, tsunami, typhoon all at once? Or, other, because I'm just picturing that would be terrible.
Yeah, that would be a bad culmination of things. And that's actually a lot of things emergency managers plan for. Like, what do we do in the case of, what if we have an earthquake and a tsunami during a tropical storm or a hurricane? Which can happen anywhere in the Pacific. And honestly, you could have it happen in the Caribbean because it's a very active area for earthquakes and even small tsunamis as well. So, the culmination of things is something you worry about. Just to go back to my friend Laura, she just sent me, I was pretty good at reading the landscape. She is in Maui. So I could tell just by the scenery that it was definitely the southwest side of Maui, where a lot of people go, is pretty dry climate, so you don't see as much lush vegetation as you do other. But yeah, they're in Maui, heading to higher ground.
Oh wow!
And now it looks like there's 4 lanes of traffic. So one of the things I noticed there about the evacuation routes, they do counterflow from the coast. And if you've ever done hurricane evacuations, you're familiar with that, where both sides of the interstate or the highway
turn the direction around.
Become, and on the Hawaiian Islands, there's no interstates, so. There's only interstates on Oahu, which is like the city island, they call it. That's where there's actual interstates. That's where Honolulu is in the big city. But on these other islands, it's mostly just highways, like split highways and roads. So what they do is both sides of the road end up becoming the same direction to get people away from the coast. So that's what it looks like she's driving in right now, because both sides of the road are all going the same direction.
Yeah.
So that's pretty wild. I mean,
is she scared? I mean, I'd be terrified. She's probably there with her family.
She seems pretty calm. I don't know. The traffic looks heavy. It looks like 3 lanes of traffic going the same direction, so I can't imagine. And Maui, there's not a lot of people on Maui to begin with. That's the other thing about traveling in the Hawaiian Islands. Outside of Oahu, which I will say is very city-oriented on the south side, in Kauai, the north shore of Oahu and stuff, it's you feel like you're in the country. There's just not a lot of big buildings and stuff, so the infrastructure there, getting around is hard. Like we joked when we were there, you pull up something, that's only 5 miles away, and it's like a 30-minute drive.
Oh wow!
Because it's just hard to get around. There's only 2-lane roads.
Yeah.
There's tons of traffic circles and stop signs, and they're very good about not doing too much infrastructure because they want to keep the islands natural, and so you don't see about elevated roadways and on ramps, off ramps. It's a lot of 4-way stops, traffic circles, stoplights. So when you go a short distance, it's like it takes a long time to get places. So that's also why they warn so early, because they know it takes a long time for people to get from the coast to higher ground.
So I mean, I'm just looking ahead here, because we talked about things maybe being a couple hours out from some of these, particular locations that are being warned, like Hawaii. Maybe in the overnight hours, if there's something that's coming, tsunami related, it would be in that period of time.
Yeah.
For folks who are following us here on WCNC Plus, obviously we've got the 11 o'clock news coming up. We'll keep you posted there as well. But I mean, in the morning when people are waking up, how much are we going to be talking about this still? I'm just curious, here on the East Coast.
It'll still be ongoing, and hopefully it'll all be good news on like videos and pictures of small waves coming ashore and not massive destruction. But people will still be evacuating because our time, it's probably going to be in the morning. So if you think about this, 6 o'clock there or 7 o'clock their time is going to be after midnight to 1 a.m. here, and then that probably will take another 6 hours for most of the waves. So yeah, right into our morning show, they'll probably still be evacuating, still be under a warning. And then you got to realize it's all going to go to the South Pacific. So if there's stuff happening on the west coast of South America, or say, parts of Australia or New Zealand or the South Pacific Islands, then they would be dealing with that through the early morning hours tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, it's just wild. I mean, I know from the discussions we had about magnitude and just, the incredible force in general that just exists on our planet, the capacity for, the way our planet in so many different ways can impact us. I'm amazed, and I'm amazed to think about just how many people around the world are watching this closely and worried, that this could be coming towards them.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think of the Indonesian earthquake. I was actually working that morning when that happened. And I remember at the time, like running around, like telling the producers and like, this is a big, and no one really could grasp like this was a big deal until the video started coming in of the water. And then that became such a big story. And the one good thing about that, I think, is that most people now in the Indian Ocean and now the Pacific, they take these tsunamis very seriously. One of the things we learned from the Indonesian tsunami was the Pacific, there's no warning system in the Indian Ocean. We have this, the map, the maps and the stuff we're showing you is from this great organization that we have here in the United States. It's the U.S. Tsunami Warning System. The Pacific Warning System is based in Honolulu, Hawaii. I actually drove by it when I was there, and I remember seeing it where they go, there's this nondescript building. It's like, doesn't look like much, but that's where the Pacific Tsunami Warning branch is. It's a branch of the National Weather Service. And they're based there. Back in the 2011 Indonesian Ocean tsunami, they had no way to warn those countries in the Indian Ocean because they weren't responsible for that area. They tried to call people. They were reaching out to, representatives. I think they were reaching out to U.S. embassies and telling them, hey, there's a big tsunami coming. They didn't have a warning system, and now they do in the Indian Ocean. And people in the Pacific Ocean, because of all the visuals of that, and then obviously the Japanese earthquake in 2011 was another one. I think there's a lot of visuals, and we live in a world where people need to see threats to really grasp them. They don't really understand what an 8.7 earthquake is or what a tsunami is until they see the pictures. And so, thankfully, I think in most cases everybody will treat this very seriously. And hopefully it's just a 3 or 4 foot tsunami, and I'm not saying only, that would be like a good thing. If it's that small, it would just hopefully just cause minor issues on the coast and not cause massive destruction.
Yeah. We're coming up close to the top of the next hour. We've had continuous coverage, folks who are, maybe just hopping on here on Live Impact News on WCNC Plus streaming of this massive earthquake. As Brad mentioned, one that's likely going to be in the top 10 of strongest earthquakes ever to strike. We've got these tsunami alerts that are underway, impacting parts of the U.S. We've got Hawaii, Alaska in particular, that are being warned. We also have parts of the west coast of continental U.S. that are under advisories as well. And, globally, this is having an impact. In fact, Russia, where this earthquake originated, this 8.8 magnitude earthquake originated, they have already reported a tsunami, according to multiple reports, heights of 10 to 13 feet. And the potentials now of some of these, outlying areas, if you will, the areas like Hawaii, Alaska, that are perhaps waiting hours at this point to see what exactly is coming their way. We're seeing, several feet estimated in some locations that are kind of on the higher end that could be seeing several feet high here of tsunami. But Brad, you had some really great explanations for folks. I don't know if you're seeing anything brand new that's coming in on your feed, but I think your explanation too of just what a tsunami is and what it looks like was really eye-opening to me, because I think a lot of people do have the imagery of it being a wave, and the fact that you were saying it's kind of just like the water lifting up.
Yeah, it's kind of like a rapid rise in water you would see in a tide. That's why sometimes it was referred to as a tidal wave. It really had nothing to do with tides, but because it looked like a rapid rise in the water you would see at a high tide. It doesn't come in as just like a crashing wave that you would surf on, though it can sometimes depending on where it is. It's just a rapid rise in water. It's just like all of a sudden the water would just come up and it doesn't go back down. And so it comes in quickly. And it's really hard for people to understand what you're seeing. And if you on the coast, and one of the first things, Mother Nature gives us some clues, the water will go out first, right? The water level drops because as a wave builds, you got to imagine the water has to go back to build up into this peak, right? And then come in. And so there's troughs and crests in any wave pattern. That's what waves are. And so the first thing that gets to you usually is the trough. And the trough is when the water goes down. And so you see the images from the Indonesian quake and even the Fukushima quake. The water goes out and all of a sudden all these reefs and fish and stuff are exposed. You see that, run. get inland right away, because that means the water is going to come rushing back in tenfold. And one of the reasons we know there's a pretty strong tsunami risk is looking at the USGS page. They give you some great information, by the way, if you ever want to dive into data. They have this moment tensor plot, which basically shows you how the Earth moved, whether it was side to side or up or down. And their little plot shows this was all up and down, which means it was a megathrust quake, which means a thrust means the ground moved up or down, not side to side. And underwater, if you want to get an earthquake that doesn't cause a tsunami, side to side is what you want, not up and down, because up and down displaces water.
Yeah.
And so those are the ones that cause the biggest quakes. And that's why there's such a big risk from this, because of the type of quake, not just the size. The magnitude by itself would definitely jump off at you, but the type of quake was also a big part of why this is producing a tsunami.
Yeah. I mean, the way you described how the water drops, it just made me think about, like maybe in terms that some folks might understand, hurricane coverage. We used
Yeah.
to talk all the time about reverse storm surge.
Oh, when the wind's blowing out.
And we'd
Yeah.
always have to tell people to not play when I, lived in Tampa in the bay,
Yeah, they go out and
because
play.
they go, oh, the water's all gone from the bay.
gonna
Where did
come
it
back.
go?
Yeah.
And sure enough, eventually
Yeah.
it would come back. It almost kind of, visualized in my mind that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's
because
exactly
as
the
soon
same.
as the
but-
wind changes direction, all the water comes pushing back in. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
reverse storm surge happens a lot in the Outer Banks, especially on the sound side, because the water, and sometimes that's detrimental to the sound side of the Outer Banks as the water gets pushed that way instead of coming in from the beach side. So definitely something we're gonna have to watch the remainder of tonight. But just looking at the pictures and videos out of Hawaii, at least everybody's evacuating. Everyone's heading to higher ground. They've got until it's 10 o'clock our time. Looking at the time, it's probably going to be 12:17 a.m. when the first waves get there our time. That would
Our
be
time.
7:17 their time, basically, or excuse me, about 1:17 our time.
Yeah.
So yeah, 6-hour difference. So it'll be about 1:17 in the morning when it gets there our time, but 7:17 their time. So they had about a 5.5-hour heads up for evacuation. So they should all be in a good spot.
Well, that is certainly good to hear, and we certainly hope for the best, whatever the best possible scenario is for this. And we just wanted to kind of set the table here, because we're not going to fully end here coverage of this tsunami alert and this earthquake, because we've got local coverage coming to us from Hawaii, from the news teams there, that we're going to turn to at this point. Keep in mind, Brad and I will be back for the news at 11 o'clock. Of course, more updates on this, as well as your local headlines.